Thank you all for joining our webinar. We'll begin the webinar momentarily. Just want to address a few things first, especially regarding asking questions throughout the webinar. Please feel free to ask questions through the Q&A session. You should see the tab at the bottom of your Zoom panel. Our panelists will address the questions during the Q&A session, which we would have towards the end of our session today. That's it. Rahul, please go ahead.
All right, thanks, Lena. So hello, everyone, and welcome to the second in our 2024 webinar series on the importance of supply diversity in supply chain management and in procurement. My name is Rahul Asthana, and I head product here at Gainfront. Just by way of introduction, Gainfront is a full supplier discovery to pay software platform, but we have a very, very strong focus on helping companies with their supplier diversity programs. So as the title says, today's topic is supplier diversity, 5 reasons why it creates competitive advantage. And I'm really excited that I'm joined by 2 distinguished experts in supplier diversity and DEI, Diana Domenech and Jonathan Mays, to help unpack this topic. So just to give you a brief introduction, Diana is the owner of Accelerate Consulting Experts, where she advises companies on how to strategize and execute global diversity and sustainability programs. Prior to starting her own firm, Diana spent 14 years at JP Chase, where she was vice president of the corporate supplier diversity program. Diana has a bachelor's from Cornell University, as well as an MBA from the New York University Stern School of Management. Jonathan Mays is CEO of Jonathan Mays Consulting. Formerly, he was senior vice president of diversity and inclusion at Albertsons, the supermarket chain. He has twice been named one of the top 100 diversity and inclusion executives in the US. Jonathan received his bachelor's from Warner Pacific College and a JD degree from Willamette College, University College of Law. So welcome, Diana and Jonathan. I'm excited to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be here. And one of the things that and welcome everyone. One of the things we decided to do was just to make sure that we are all clear on what we mean by supplier diversity. And there are a number of ways to describe it, but here's one. When I think about supplier diversity, I think about leveraging the power. So it's a strategic initiative or program that organizations have to leverage the power of diverse vendors. And by diverse, I'm talking about those that are more than 50% owned and operated by women, by people of color, by LGBTQ plus folks in that community. Some expand it to include folks who are veterans or disabled veterans. But when I talk about supplier, and Diana and I talk about, and Rahul and I talk about supplier diversity, we're talking about a whole spectrum of individuals, but again, with the plan in mind to leverage the power of diversity throughout a company's enterprise.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan, for that definition. As you know, one of the prevailing reasons why people think about supply diversity in supply chain management and procurement is really to pigeonhole it in terms of being a moral or societal imperative, right? So let's correct for past injustices. But here at Gainfront, what we've seen working with our customers is this is not really the only reason. There's actually a lot more advantage that you get. So I was looking for you to expand on this. So I'll start with you, Jonathan. What are your experiences in terms of what supplier diversity can do for companies?
So we're going to talk about 5 of them, Diane and I. And the first one of the 5 is this whole notion of working with evolving communities. And Diana, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to kind of kick that off, and then I'll maybe add a couple of comments at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, diverse suppliers, they really help companies meet the needs of evolving communities as the face of the customer changes, as the footprint of a company may also expand and go into new and different areas. diverse suppliers, they oftentimes have unique insights that can really benefit their clients. And that's really where I believe the competitive advantage then comes in for a company in leveraging and engaging in vendor diversity and then putting those practices to align with their businesses. So like as an example, as a company is looking to expand into the Hispanic market, it would be a wise choice to engage with a diverse vendor, maybe one that is Hispanic owned, that offers language capabilities, that has cultural competence to help work with a company to navigate maybe in marketing or in communications, maybe even like in product design, to be able to bring that insight as to how they can break into or really monopolize the Latino market by having those insights that that type of vendor can bring. There are other companies that may say that they offer that, but there's proof in the pudding when you have companies that can bring some of that lived experience, but then also have the business acumen to then service their clients and really advance them and generating revenue and increasing their customer base in ways that other vendors can't. I mean, Jonathan, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with all that you said. I used to work for a large supermarket chain, about nearly 300,000 employees across most of the states. And one of the things early on in my work with that company and other companies in that industry is the decisions that were made with regard to products that go on the shelves, right? Who made those decisions? And it struck me that when I looked at the departments that made those decisions, not just at the company I work for, but many other companies, it was really predominantly non-diverse men making decisions about what would go on the shelves. And most of us know in a supermarket setting, the typical customer happens to be a female, but decisions made by male. And it's much the same thing in terms of just who makes decisions about, in the case of a retailer, what goes on their shelves. And to your point, Diana, I think there's a lot of merit in saying, okay, who are our customers? Who are our prospective customers? What do they want? How has this evolved over the last 20 years? And maybe we should tap into that group to better understand what other people in that group might want to see on their shelves in terms of products that are offered for sale. And so you're right. I mean, evolving communities are exactly what's occurring. And this is going to continue, obviously, for years for the coming future. I think most of you know that most people who have studied this have said that the US is going to be majority minority by 2045, 2050. And so maybe we need to just lean into this whole effort even more of getting the perspectives of people who are more and more representing the communities that we serve.
So Jonathan, if I can interject with a personal anecdote, I've been in the Bay Area for over 20 years now. And I know that when I first came here, it was very much less diverse than it is today.
Yeah.
And what has been striking to me is that when I do go to supermarket stores and such as Albertsons, as well as other like Safeway and Costco, the mix of products has actually evolved to meet the mix of the people in the community. So it's quite interesting, being of Indian background, that my community is very excited about the fact that they can find goods that meet their requirements in Costco. So it just seems like a smart business decision to basically think about getting those goods in the store, and then how do you, to Diana's point, how do you get them? You need the right suppliers, right? You need folks who can actually supply these goods.
Right.
So
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So the second question here was, can this be a win-win for companies in terms of bringing in a supplier diversity program? So Jonathan, Diana, one of you would want to take this?
Sure. I'll kick it off, and I welcome Diana's perspectives. Just a quick story I'll never forget. There was a person who owned a business in Southern California, and they provided security services for companies. And they wanted to provide security services for the company I was working for. It was a diverse-owned business. And he said, Jonathan, kind of step back for a second. Think about the people who would be working for me and who work for me currently. These are people who are largely diverse. These are people who will be getting income that they will be paying taxes on. Some of them, not all of them, some of them are going to be buying houses at some point. They're going to be paying property taxes. Some of them are even going to come back and shop in your stores. And so by hiring my firm, you're actually helping not only them, but you're helping yourself in the sense that these are people who are going to benefit the communities where you serve. They're going to put money in the pocket of people in the communities you serve so they can come back and spend their money where you are. They're going to support the communities where you operate. And that really just stuck with me. And I was just doing some research just recently about the number of small businesses that are minority owned. And that number is kind of hard to pin down, but the US Business Administration report, the most recent one, says there are more than 10 million minority owned businesses in the US. Think about that for a second. Think about where you live. More than 10 million. And so certainly in most, if not all instances for people on the call, there are small businesses that are minority owned in your area where you live. And these, again, if they are robust, are a way potentially to help your business by purchasing goods and services that you offer. But the only way they can do that is if we engage them by hiring them and giving them an opportunity to hire other people who can in turn come back and make it a win-win for your business. Diana?
Yeah, I love that, Jonathan. Win-win can happen in so many different ways. Two that come to mind, coming from the financial services sector. We used to talk internally about how we want to create more banking communities and make customers bankable, make communities bankable. And part of the way to make them bankable is to support their businesses, support their entrepreneurs, and uplift those communities so then we can go in and could bank with them and turn them into customers and support them with their financial services needs. And so there's that just kind of following the dollar. How do you put a dollar into a community to then be able to get that dollar back out and support that dollar just rotating through the economy? And it's a win-win for everybody. The community wins because, like you said, Jonathan, there's more employment opportunities, there's greater development, people can have a better quality of life. And then at least when I was in financial services, we talk about, and then we're able to help them manage their money and show them and teach them and provide the services in order for them to be able to do that.
Yes.
Putting an employer's hat on as well, though. I mean, win-win also is for attracting and retaining talent, especially with the workforce the younger workforce that's out there now. The Gen Zers are very aware of what are companies doing in the community? How are they being socially responsible? And so part of attracting talent is by being able to demonstrate and show, you're supporting communities, you're supporting other groups by your vendor diversity initiative. And being vocal about it, so that potential employees hear that, so your current employees hear that and feel good and feel proud about where they are. It may seem like something soft, but those things go a long way. It goes a very long way.
Diana, I completely agree. I was talking with a client just a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about how folks applying for positions, and Gen Zers and millennials as well, are just wanting to know. To your point, they want to know, what are you doing to support the communities where we operate? And then going back to that vendor story I mentioned earlier of this company that provided security services. I mean, he was borrowing a line from that Jerry Maguire movie. Help me, help you, right? Help me. And this is by having a robust and serious supplier diversity program. It's a way to, again, help me, help you. I mean, help the businesses help come back and benefit us. And so it's in that sense, it truly is and can be a win-win.
So this reminds me to something that Henry Ford pioneered, which is he basically said, look, if I pay my employees well, they'll buy my cars. It's the same sort of idea, right? If you uplift your community, they'll buy your products, right?
Yes.
So that makes sense.
Yes.
So I've been in supply chain management for quite a while, and one of the things that I thought was really fascinating was the concept that you brought up forward, Jonathan, which is that diverse suppliers can provide a more nimble, flexible, and efficient approach to to serving a supply chain. I was wondering if you could expand on that.
Sure, Brian, if you don't mind, if you would check that off, and then I'll come along afterwards with with anything I might want to add.
Yeah. I think the pandemic really brought to light the flexibility and the nimbleness of diverse vendors. I heard so many examples of like when companies were looking for masks and they were trying to go to some of the larger suppliers, those supplies had been wiped out, and those large suppliers were on lists along with everybody else trying to get access to all of those materials, all of those equipment, all that equipment. And diverse vendors were the ones that were able to barter and to act, swiftly and nimbly in order to be able to access that, and then also pivot as corporate needs changed and evolved. That there isn't necessarily all the bureaucracy. A lot of times with diverse vendors, you can speak directly to the president and the CEO and help to get your answers, get your concerns addressed and answers to your questions, and work directly on a plan. And that collaboration really goes a long way, especially when a large corporation has many needs to be fulfilled. To know that you have a solid partner is, both peace of mind, but good business. And so engaging with more diverse vendors, I think that's one of the benefits definitely of them. But what's your take, Jonathan?
Yeah, completely agree. So I have a house that experienced, like many of our houses on the West Coast in California, a lot of rain just in the last week or two, just a lot of rain. And I had some friends staying at this house, and I was away, and they said, Jonathan, just so you know, you have a leak. It's not a major one, but we've got some pots out and we're catching some water, just heads up. And so, Dinah, I started calling these, big companies, roofing companies down in that area where the house is located, big companies, reputable companies, and all that sort of stuff. And they're saying, oh, yeah, well, I can get back to you in April. Oh, no joke. I can get to you in April. We're booked at least 12 weeks. I mean, no joke. And then I just kept reaching it, and I found a small business that just happened to be minority owned. And they said, we can come out tomorrow. And so just to take the step further, they not only came out the next day, but they killed it. I mean, they absolutely killed the leak. And just were nimble, to use that word again. They were just flat out nimble. And so I'm just grateful for that. You were talking about masks. I mean, I heard stories as well about organizations that provide like hair products. And so they just pivoted. And they said, well, we're used to mixing different ingredients to come up with different products. And so they came out with hand sanitizers, right, when that was just very much in need and in short supply, and also multi-purpose cleaning solutions as well. So that, to your point, Anna, they just pivoted. And quite often, not always, large companies can't do that. I mean, it's the difference between maneuvering a speedboat and an ocean liner. I mean, they both can pivot, but sometimes the smaller one can pivot much faster. And in that way, that's why they can be in many ways much more nimble, much more flexible, and much more efficient in the way that they go to market.
That's fascinating. So it's really about the fact that given their size, they're not constrained by bureaucracy.
Yep.
So the whole company is basically focused on serving your needs versus whereas a big company may be focused on whatever they're focused on, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. The fourth point that both of you had highlighted to me that I thought was very interesting is that supply diversity leads to increased profitability. And this I'm really curious about. How does that happen?
Yeah, and I think this surprises a lot of people, right? Because they can have this perception, well, if they're bigger, then they're going to be cheaper. And that certainly is a perception, but it's not always reality. I was just doing additional research on this in preparation for our conversation today. And there's an organization called the Hackett Group, and they've done a number of studies on this. And I'm just going to just share with you some of the things that they have said. They have said that businesses that are serious about and committed to supplier diversity have realized a return on their investment that's 133% higher than businesses that rely solely on what are called traditional suppliers. I'm going to say that again because it stunned me, but I read it a couple of different places. So I just want to say it again, just to make sure that it's clear. Businesses that really have an effective supplier diversity program realized a return on investment that was 133% higher than businesses relying solely on, if you will, traditional suppliers. And they went on to say that on average, supplier diversity programs add $3.6 million to the bottom line for every $1 million in procurement operating costs. That's the ratio that they found based on their study. So reason one why it can benefit, if you will, the bottom line, that is really leaning into supplier diversity, is just the profit that can result from it. Second thing that can be advantageous with regard to hiring diverse vendors is lower operating costs that can result in higher profit. So companies with supplier diversity programs spent an average, this is again according to Hackett, an average of 20% less, on their buying operations compared to similar companies operating without these programs. I'm not saying that 100% of the time the prices will be lower. I'm just saying in this study group by Hackett, they found much more often than not that companies that engage in word and in deed effective supplier diversity programs typically are able to get the cost of goods and sometimes cost of services lower than companies that say, nah, we don't want to do supplier diversity. So that's a second reason why it makes financial and bottom line sense to really lean into supplier diversity. Here's the third, and there's probably more than three, but here's the third. And Diana alluded to this earlier. It's this whole notion of innovation, increased innovation. Diana and I have backgrounds in just diversity in general and that whole world of living inclusively. And what we know from studies by McKinsey, by the Boston Consulting Group, Harvard Review, Business Review, they've all published it. And just one stat from the Boston Consulting Group is that when you have a high percentage of women who are in leadership of an organization, they're 10% more likely to see increased innovative revenue. In other words, companies tend to be more innovative as you lean into diversity. And so when you think about product development by supplier diverse potential vendors for goods and services, oftentimes they can be very innovative, sometimes more so than other companies. And so those are three reasons why there are bottom line benefits to leaning into supplier diversity.
Yeah, Jonathan, those are definitely all the ways that in many different ways that it can bring profitability to a company. For the people who have joined our webinar that are supplier diversity professionals, I would then encourage you to really think about how are you then measuring that profitability? In sourcing, in procurement, and supply chain, there's a lot of time focus on cost and total amount spent, but what are some of the other metrics that are driving and fueling the business? So how is it generating revenue? How is it bringing new ideas, unlocking innovation, and supporting new product development? Or how is it, saving money? How is it increasing the number of customers? But, really reaching out into your businesses and understanding what are the metrics that are driving them? What are the metrics that are tying to their bottom line, and aligning supplier diversity efforts with those metrics as well, so that there is a direct correlation between working with diverse vendors and how it is profitable for your company.
Wow, that's fascinating. I'm sold. I think certainly if profitability is a key driver of supplier diversity, then every company should be engaging in it. Diana, you had mentioned earlier that millennials are looking for companies that reflect their values, and I think this speaks more broadly to the fact that you build your brand if you do engage with supplier diversity programs. The other thing that was surprising in what I'd heard you tell me earlier was, or it may have been you, Jonathan, that this helps with your ESG as well, because you're reducing your logistics in your own communities. So I was wondering if you can expand on this. This is fascinating to me. I mean, how do you tie in both brand and ESG to supply diversity, which are, not necessarily immediately associated.
Yeah, I think, as companies evolve and as the global landscape evolves, what at least what I've been seeing is that the global language is around ESG isn't necessarily DEI as we use here primarily in the United States. And so starting to shift the dialogue, to shift the vernacular, so that it falls into the ESG, then does make us more global citizens. And the diversity is the S part of that ESG. And so as your companies are working with customers that are outside of the US or that are global in nature, or are looking to attract and to work with customers in those regions, being able to speak that universal language is the direction to go into. It doesn't take away from what vendor diversity is. It just starts to put it into what's also then a larger context, into just a bigger model of how companies are moving forward as being good global corporate citizens.
Yes.
But Jonathan, so what's your take on this?
Yeah, so
You headed this up, right?
I did. So you're right. Environmental social governance. So the whole world of ESG, and you're right. A lot of folks, when they think about supplier diversity, they think, oh, well, it's the right thing to do. It's the societally right thing to do, and all that sort. And there's truth to that. But I hope that the folks listening understand that that's truth to that. But that's just one of many reasons to lean into ESG, and more specifically into supplier diversity. You mentioned, the S, it's the right thing to do, and that's exactly right. But there's also the E part of it as well that people tend not to think about. And so think about it again, the local small businesses in the communities that you serve, and how product gets from there, or services, but let's talk about products, get from them to you as the company. They're closer. And so, and just in terms of the environmental footprint that is involved in getting their products from their shop to your store, or your business, it's less because it's flat closer compared to most other more national brands. Not to knock national brands, but we're keeping it real here. They're closer, and so it's just a shorter distance, therefore less environmental impact. Fewer transportation, less transportation costs. Logistically, it's much less complex in many ways, and so that's another reason why this is really something to lean into.
Yeah, Jonathan, you bring up a really great point because working in a large corporation, there are so many goals and so many objectives that an organization is looking to accomplish, and so in supply chain, there is the question of, well, is this an environmental play or is this a social play? And so finding the way to be able to bring the two together to create that, if we go back to one of our earlier points, some of that win-win is super huge. And so working then within that ESG framework really helps an organization and position supplier diversity to then be checking off on multiple objectives, on multiple goals of the organization, and just increasing the value.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of companies understand this, increasingly so. There's something called the $1 billion roundtable. It's made up of a small group of very large companies. You'd all recognize their names if we were to list them. But what this roundtable is committed to is, and they're already doing, is they're spending more than $1 billion each supporting diverse vendors. And think about it. These are, again, not to mention names, but these are the biggest, presumably some of the best run companies, but they understand fundamentally the importance of ESG, and more specifically supplier diversity, where they are putting their money where their mouth is. And so I just challenge those of you who are working in supplier diversity in your firm, just to really just look at, if you will, what are considered by some the best practices. And this is certainly one, and that is embracing supplier diversity being certainly one of those.
Actually, Jonathan, that's a great segue to my next question. So we talked about excuse me, we talked about 5, but I think honestly, both of you have uncovered a lot more than 5 reasons why supplier diversity is important for your company. So the question is this: given that it is important, how would you recommend to the audience that they communicate this value to stakeholders, particularly in today's environment? I mean, how do you get across this message that you've both been highlighting today?
So for me, Rahul, and thanks for that question, is three things. It's the what, it's the why, and the how. And by that, I mean, by folks who are involved in supplier diversity already or thinking about getting involved, the question is, what are we doing? What is our organization doing now with regard to supplier diversity? What are we doing? And one of the ways to measure that, I mean, is to use platforms like Gamefronts, right? To really understand what are we spending exactly with diverse vendors. And when I was working in corporate America, we used this platform of your company. That's how I became familiar with it and became a fan of it and supporter. But you use this to understand, what are we doing now? What exactly is our spend? And how does that relate overall to our spend? And by that, I mean, if you find out that you're spending 5%, just to pick a number, with diverse vendors, 5%, when you look across, well, California, the majority is more than 50% of the people are women or people of color. You have to ask yourself, maybe we need to think again about what our spend is. So what? So people who work in organizations, what are we doing? That's the first thing. What? Second thing is why? Okay, why is supplier diversity important? Why should we lean into it more than we are? And that's what Diana and I and you have been talking about today, by giving at least 5 reasons why it can benefit your organization, give you a competitive advantage. And so I'm asking for folks just to be a champion, an ambassador, an advocate, just to say, here's what we're doing. That's the what. Here's why it's important for us to lean into it even more. The why. And then and to talk about how we can do it and the reasons for it that we've just been mentioning. And then the how. How do we do it? How now that we know what our spend is, now we know why it's important. How do we move forward? And so asking folks just to lean in and just to say, these are the things we need to do to build a robust supplier diversity program. And one of those things that I alluded to earlier is to think about leveraging the format that you all offer, called through Gamefront, that my company that I used to work for used, and some on the call as well. But to partner with your organization to kind of better understand what steps we can take next to move the needle with regard to the percent of organizations that are in our supply chain that are diverse.
I love that framework that you provided, Jonathan, with the what, the why, the how, because I think that's really helpful as people go to think about how to break this down and how to approach it. It's interesting, Rahul, when you ask this question, I look at it a little bit differently. I love frameworks, don't get me wrong. When you say, how do they communicate this value to their stakeholders? I zeroed in on the how do you communicate this, and one piece of food for thought is who is communicating it is really important, and how are they communicating it, and so with stakeholders, who's delivering that message is really important. And it's just like I used to have a team member that worked for me that would get frustrated with some we'd go into a meeting and he'd make a comment, and then after the meeting there may be sidebar conversations, and I'd have a sidebar conversation and mention what he said, and then he'd say, how come because you said it they listened to you, but when I said it they didn't? And I said, listen, it was the same message, but sometimes a message is received differently from one person versus another. It's not that the person was wrong or that the message was any different, but it's important how that message is coming out and who's delivering it. And so in order for your stakeholders to hear it, think about who needs to be saying it. Does it need to be your CEO? Does it need to be your head of customer engagement? Does it need to be a CPO? Does it need to be a vendor diversity manager? But who's sending that message out is an important component to think about than how your stakeholders are hearing it and receiving it.
And related to that, I totally agree. And in most organizations, and I think Diana would agree as well, when the CEO makes a statement about something that's important, it tends to carry more weight. I mean, again, we promise to keep it real. We're keeping it real. Than if someone in a different role says the same thing. And also think about how you communicate that, right? You can communicate it maybe at a town hall or maybe in a memo that's sent, but think about the power as well if that's communicated on your external facing website, about your commitment to supporting the community, your commitment to inclusive sourcing, which is another way of saying supplier diversity, inclusive sourcing. And so, yeah, absolutely, who the messenger is, not only what, but who the messenger is, matters a lot in terms of the weight.
So did you, in your experience, did you have, was it an uphill battle to communicate this, or did you have to, did you find a receptive audience? So what is your experience in your respective organizations?
I think when you work in a large organization, you work with a lot of different personalities. And as much as we would love to believe that there's one size that fits all, there is not one size that fits all. And so there were, I mean, it was my experience. There were some groups that were very receptive to it. And then there are others that were not so much. But for those that weren't, those are the ones I say that help keep you on your toes, because you really got to step back and you got to ask yourself then, well, why were they not receptive to it? And how can we make them receptive to it? Is it a misunderstanding about what's important to them? Is it about an experience that they previously had and helping to give them a new experience or, you know, a new perspective on it? Is it that they just have other priorities and they just, you know, kind of feel like, get off, like, don't bother me today, or, you know, but what's going on? But it, you know, as much as we love to thought we could have just done it one way. Yeah.
Would you agree?
I see you nodding, Jonathan.
Yes.
Would you potentially agree that it might be that there's a lack of understanding the full benefits of supplier diversity?
And that's where I think that, you know, it's for vendor diversity professionals, and for, you know, if they're building out a team or they're putting ambassadors have ambassadors within their business units, it's helping to translate that into the business talk and why is it important to the business? And going back to like what Jonathan was saying, why is it important? You know, how are we doing it? What are we doing here? And in that sense, you know, like when I think about when I was working in banking, the retail bank, which is, you know, operating the branches and facing off with customers, everyday customers on the street, had a different perspective than, say, like asset management, which is working with, you know, high net worth individuals. And so we had to tweak some of that message versus treasury, who's working with a lot of corporate clients. And so, you know, understanding what's important to the business, and being able to translate it into a message that resonates with them is I think is part of the key.
Yes, and I think a message that resonates with people is to approach it this way. And there are a number of different ways, but here's one way to approach it. Just to kind of step back and just ask yourself, maybe ask others, fundamentally, what's the goal of our organization? What's the goal? In most instances, it's to be as profitable as we can be the number one in our sector, whatever. But something related to being the best we can possibly be is in the answer, right? By asking this question, what's our goal? Somewhere in the answer is likely to be the very best we can possibly be. Next question. Are you committed to that? Or are you just kind of saying it? Well, most people will say, of course I'm committed to it. Of course I'm not just saying it. I believe this. Or they're going to say that, right? Then the next statement to make is, well, if you're committed to being the very best you can possibly be, then that would suggest to me that means that you're wanting to do everything you can to increase your likelihood for being as successful as you can possibly be. Yes? Well, the answer, of course, is yes. Well, good. I'm glad we agree, because one of the things we can do to increase the chances for our being successful is to truly lean into, in word and in deed, supplier diversity. Because it's been shown time and time again, the companies that lean into diversity, supplier diversity, in word and by their actions, typically outperform companies that do not. And Diana and I have shared 5 of those reasons, and there are more, but those are 5 reasons why that statement is true. And when you do that, it should increase the likelihood for people to maybe have a light go off over their head if one is not already illuminated, but also to be more willing to act, and to act in the ways that move forward your whole supplier diversity agenda, as opposed to moving backwards or to stay stagnant.
Well, that's pretty powerful, Jonathan. Thanks. The one thing I will take away is what, why, and how. It's an amazing framework. So thanks. Diana, you had alluded to something that I wanted to drill down on a little bit more, which is you talked about how you have to tailor the message to different industries. So I was wondering, Jonathan, you came from the supermarket world, and Diana, you come from the financial world. Can you expand on this notion of supplier diversity in these industries, how they apply, and what you need to do to move the needle forward in each of these industries, or in different industries in general?
Yeah, I think it's part of it's diving deep into the industry and kind of seeing what's driving and what's motivating the industry. Like when I gave the example of being in financial services, there were some cases, where, like I gave the example of the retail bank, where we're working with consumer clients. And for them, they want to feel good about the company that they're working with, and they want to see how the bank that they're with is supporting the community and operating in the community, and know that that they're with a socially responsible organization that's also going to be a good steward of their money. But then, when we went into some of the other products, in some cases there's regulation. There were aspects of the bank that were working with government institutions, or could be local, not just federal government, local government, where the local government is then also saying, this is important to us, and we are going to issue a regulation, and in order to do business with us, we require that you adhere to this regulation. So in some cases, there was a little bit more of a steadfast rule that thou must, thou shall, versus like in the case of the retail bank, where it was more appealing to the customer, and it was part of building the trust and building the relationship with the customer. And so it's a lot of work to really do that span of where are the different businesses operating, who are they working with, and then what's important to all of them. But I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, we all work because we're looking to provide a service, we're looking to provide a product, and we want our customers to be happy, and we want our organizations to continue to thrive. And so doing that alignment with what the needs of the customer are, and then performing in alignment with those needs is, I think, what's going to drive a lot of success in organizations.
Yes.
Anything else to add, Jonathan, or?
Yeah, I agree. And I would say to people who are on our call today and listening in, I'm going to just ask you just to kind of step back for a second. Think about the organization you work for. Think about accounts payable for your organization. Who are you paying for services? Who are you paying for goods? Ask yourself, do I know what percent of those accounts payable accounts to vendors supplying goods or services happen to be diverse, women-owned, minority-owned, LGBTQ+, disabled, veteran, whatever? Do I know that? And then, but even beyond that, just to say, I wonder if there's an opportunity for us to be a little bit more expansive in the way we think about who's providing these services. Because I heard Diana, I heard Jonathan, heard Rahul talk about some of the business advantages. But my challenge to you, just listening in, is to ask yourself, are there folks that we could be reaching out to that we are not? There's just one quick example. I remember one company I worked for, and we were thinking about our legal services. And the fact that there are many, just picking, I'm a lawyer, so I'm gonna just, take a step further into that, because I know you all love lawyers, and so it's a good example, right? But are there law firms out there that are women-owned or that are minority-owned, if you will, that we can engage with? And in our case, with the company I used to work with, we did, and we're just surprised in a really positive way at not only the quality of the work, because some people had these perceptions that were wrong, but also the cost for which we were able to procure those services. And so I just want to challenge everybody just to see if we can take it a step further in terms of just being more inclusive in the way that we think about who's providing goods and services.
And that leads me to ask about the nuts and bolts of actually managing these programs, right? I mean, you have to collect data, you have to find suppliers that are diverse, etc. What are some of the best practices you've experienced in your respective careers in terms of how you manage these programs?
I'll kick it off, and Dinah, just please, add your perspective. It's welcome, very much welcomed. But in the role I served as a former chief diversity officer and overseeing supplier diversity and a small team that was involved on it on a more daily basis, I really wanted to know. I mean, we were at that point a nearly $60 billion company. Great, that's terrific. What percent of our goods and services are with diverse vendors? And so the first thing, I alluded to this earlier, is just to find and use tools like Gamefront, but find out what exactly are we doing. That's the first step. And to ask yourself, are we where we need to be or where we should be? Or is there an opportunity to increase this? Because again, the best practices are for companies that are leaning into this to, again, reflect the growing number of diverse individuals that make up our country. And so that's the first step. It's just a measure. The second step is to really, and I alluded to this before, but just to explain the why it's important to increase our engagement with these vendors for the reasons that we've all mentioned. So those are a couple of just best practices that my former company used, and the other companies I mentioned, the $1 Billion Roundtable. Those are a couple of steps that they take that would be considered really, if you will, the gold standard, the best practices in terms of moving forward with supplier diversity. And Diane, I'm going to pass the baton to you for any additional comments that you would like to share.
Yeah, I think it's all about empowerment. And it's thinking about how do you empower people who are making vendor selections, decisions in selecting vendors. How do you empower them to make informed decisions? So Gamefront is a great tool. That's a great way to inform others, one, like through the reporting to see, what does your spend look like, to then be able to use the vendor search component to be able to look for vendors as opportunities are coming up. If a company wanted to buy into the RFP capabilities of Gamefront, to even incorporate that into their RFPs by leveraging the Gamefront technology, or building that into if they're using another outside technology. But it's really about empowerment, so that it's no one person's responsibility, but how are you providing your colleagues with the information, with the tools, with the processes, in order for them to be able to successfully carry that out. And then rewarding and recognizing for those who are doing well. It doesn't always work, and still acknowledging that too, because not every effort is a home run. But I always say that if we don't allow the diverse vendors a chance at bat, then there isn't a chance for them to hit a home run. And so, promoting that inclusivity, and then celebrating when there are wins, because at the end of the day, it is still competitive. But celebrating those wins, I believe, are the ways, and how I've seen organizations be very successful. Because there are I've seen organizations where the organization is heavily reliant on the vendor diversity manager. And when something doesn't work, they come back and they say, oh, well, it's because the vendor diversity manager didn't. Vendor diversity is not one person's responsibility. It's everyone who's doing purchasing, all of their responsibilities. And so going back to my original point, it's just about how, thinking about how you empower empower people in your organization so they can carry out this mission as well.
And
Thanks, Diana.
one additional step you could take, and again, it's not for everyone, but once you know where you are in terms of your spend, and I'm going to just, again, toss out a number, but let's just say that it's 5%, that's your diversity spend, maybe to consider saying, it's 2024, by 2026, we should move it from 5% to 8%, or whatever that number is for you, but just to think about setting a target. You don't want it to be arguably 4%, 5% to stay stagnant. And we talked about changing demographics, but just setting a target. And I agree, Diana, with Diana's point as well. It's not just one person's role, it's everybody's role who's involved in the decisions about procuring goods and services. One of the things I used to do was I used to speak to the whole team, the leaders of the whole team that were involved in procurement to help them understand the what, the why, and the how that I mentioned earlier, so that they're all hopefully invested in trying to help the company be the best it can possibly be. And one way to do that is to lean into supplier diversity.
Yeah. And there's also there's greater and a longer term impact to be had on all of this. One of the greatest conversations that I love to have with other vendor diversity professionals is when I hear somebody that I worked with, maybe like in the late 2000s, early 2010, maybe in that time, and that person's now moved to another company. And I talk to the vendor diversity manager and they go, "Oh my gosh, you used to work with so-and-so. They're so wonderful. They understand vendor diversity. They get it. They're coming here. I don't have to sell it to them. They're an advocate. They're so on board." And, that multiplier effect is huge because people move. People go from organization to organization. And if you're able to, show them a way that this can work, they can bring that to other places. And they may go someplace that has a program. They may go someplace that doesn't. And they go, "Wait a second. You don't have vendor diversity? Let me show you how to do that." That's amazing. That's amazing if we can continue to do that and then continue to multiply these efforts. So I think a longer term play to consider.
Yep. Love it.
So I'm loving this discussion, but we only have 8 minutes left, and I did want to open it up to questions. Any just very quick final thoughts, Jonathan or Diana, before I do open it up?
So I'll kick it off, and Diana, welcome your perspective as well. I mean, our goal, Rahul's, Diana, mine, is to be of help to you. That's the goal. And our hope is that you leave this conversation that we've had so far better than you came, in terms of just being even more committed, not only in your understanding of supplier diversity, but why it matters, why it's important. And so my final thought to you all would be, my hope is that you would become, if you're not already, a true champion for supplier diversity, a true advocate, if you will, a supplier diversity evangelist. Evangelists, by definition, are true believers, and their goal is to help others see the light, if you will. And so that's my hope for you, that you will be a supplier diversity evangelist, not just for the reason, just because you want to do it, but because it's good for your community, it's good for your organization.
That's a good one, Jonathan. I would just, I just applaud everybody for joining the webinar today, because we need to continue to talk about it. We need to continue to evolve as professionals and have these conversations and hear new and different ideas, hear reinforcement of existing ideas that we know, and get energized to continue out there, because this isn't easy work. It's not easy work. If it was so easy, then all of our jobs wouldn't exist. So hopefully today we were able to further inspire you and energize you to continue in all the good work that you're doing out there.
All right, with that, thank you very much, Jonathan and Diana. Lena, any questions from the audience?
We actually do have a couple of questions. And I think you'll have addressed it, but I'll read out the questions anyway. The first question on the how that Jonathan brings up: what are some top tips and best practices for transforming procurement teams and processes to not only accept, but champion the how?
Yeah. And I think it goes for some companies to, I hate to say it, but again, we're promised to keep it real, to the bottom line. For some, I mean, I've run into people, and that's what drives them. And so just to go to the bottom line reasons that I mentioned, the ROI, the innovation, the lower costs in some instances as well, but just to really help them understand the why. That it's not just some social good program that some people like to think of it as, but it's also something that's good for the bottom line. And then Diana mentioned this earlier, and boy, this is so important. It's one of the ways to attract and retain talent, because more and more people are wanting to know you're not about just making money, you're also about, if you will, serving the communities where you operate. And so the how is just to let folks know this is important in terms of just attracting talent and also retaining talent, is to show that you are a company that cares not just about the dollars, but about the communities that we serve to help make them better. So I could go on. I know that we're near the end of our time, but those are just a couple of quick thoughts in response to the question, and thank you for the question.
And I'd go back to the empowerment, the how a team should do it. You may give them some guardrails, but not necessarily tell them how to do it. It was, as Jonathan says, since we're keeping it real, I'm not a lawyer, and going to talk to the legal department, they were never interested in talking to me because I wasn't a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And so they still had opportunities to do vendor diversity. That message couldn't come from me to tell them how to do it, but I could tell them about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and then give them the tools so that they can then figure out how to integrate it into their department and into their practices. And they did. And then it was even better because now I didn't own it, they owned it. So thinking about how, again, that empowerment, how do you give them the tools so then, and provide them with the guardrails so then they can put it in and then they can own it, and let them celebrate those wins and successes. Let them come back to you when they have questions and challenges, and make them further advocates and supporters of what you're doing.
Nice.
Thank you.
Nina, any others?
Yes, there's one more. Just can you summarize your top 5 reasons in the end? So this is open up for all of y'all.
I can do it. So number 1 is diverse suppliers can help meet the needs of evolving communities. That's point number 1. Point number 2 that we mentioned, supplier diversity programs can be a win-win. And we talked about why. Number 3, diverse suppliers can provide a more nimble, flexible, and efficient approach to meeting client needs. That's number 3. Number 4, it's the ROI, it's the bottom line. It's all about the Benjamins, right? Supplier diversity can result in increased profitability. That was number 4. And number 5 is customers, employees, investors increasingly seek organizations that align with their values. And that was the discussion that Diana kicked off, having to do with ESG and how it's emerging in importance for most organizations that are forward thinking.
Yeah. So with that, Lena, if there are no more questions.
There are no more questions.
Okay, awesome. Well, hey, Jonathan and Diana, this has been truly fantastic. I've been in the space a little while and I learned something new. So this was really, really great to get your insights. And I want to thank the audience as well for listening in. And by all means, if you have any further questions down the road, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to circle back with you with insights from Diana and Jonathan. So again, thanks a lot for your time, Diana and Jonathan. It's been really fantastic. And thank you all for taking time to attend this webinar. And with that, I will sign off. Thanks.
Thank you.